Hello and welcome to yet another session of English lessons. Today I am going to talk to you about Edmund Spenser and his great poem Prothalamion. Now Edmund Spenser, who was born in 1552, lived in the Elizabethan England, and the period called the Elizabethan period is one that W.H. Hudson, in his outline History of English Literature, is termed as a period that ranks as one of the greatest in the annals of world literature. After long years of strife, the Crusades, the Civil War, that is the War of the Roses, finally England was enjoying a relatively peaceful period in its history. Now England had a strong ruler in Queen Elizabeth, who was resourceful and tactful enough to exercise power over her subjects and her enemies. She gave England the much needed stability which bolstered trade and economy. Being a profound scholar herself, Queen Elizabeth lent full support to the revival of learning. This was the time of when a Renaissance and Reformation reached England, and both these movements had deep intellectual and spiritual impact on the contemporary thinking and discourse. Under the aegis of Queen Elizabeth, maritime enterprises flourished and adventurers set forth to explore the oceans beyond their ken. And the discovery of the wide world beyond the seas also served to expand the horizons of man's thought and imagination. The people who consider the Queen to be the harbinger of good times adored her and became intensely patriotic, and there evolved a robust sense of nationalism. The Elizabethan age, to put it aptly, became an age in which men lived intensely, thought intensely, and wrote intensely. To borrow the words of Hudson, everything conspired to bring out of each man the best that was in him. So it was in this England that Edmund Spenser lived. He was a poet par excellence, and he is undoubtedly the greatest name in English literature after Geoffrey Chaucer. In the period between Chaucer and Spenser, literary activity of course continued, and there were a few names like White and Surrey, Thomas Sackville, George Gascoigne, but their contributions was meagre. Now Spenser is chiefly remembered for his masterpiece, The Faerie Queene. His other works include Shepherd's Calendar, Complaints, Colin Cloud's Home Again, Amority, Epithalamion, Prothalamion, and some minor works too. Today I am going to talk to you about the poem Prothalamion, which was written in 1596. Now Thalamion, the word Thalamion comes from Thalamos, which means the bridal chamber, and this particular poem was written to celebrate the double marriage of the two daughters of Edward Somerset, the Earl of Worcester. Lady Elizabeth Somerset was to marry Henry Gifford, and Lady Catherine Somerset was to marry William Peter. And this poem was written on request to commemorate this marriage, and he called it, Spenser chose to call it the Prothalamion because this was written before the marriage, and so he meant it to be before marriage, because it is Epithalamion which he has written. It celebrates the marriage itself of Spenser to his wife Elizabeth Boyle, but this one was written well in advance of the wedding. That is why he called it Prothalamion. And this poem has a pastoral setting. It is set on the banks of the river Thames and the river Lee, and the poem comprises of 10 stanzas. Each stanza has 18 lines, and it is modelled after the Italian canzone or the lyric poem. And at the end of each stanza there is a couplet, a rhyming couplet. Against the bridal day which is not long, sweet Thames, run softly till I end my song. So these two lines, the couplets, they recur after each stanza as a common refrain with slight variation. Sometimes it is which is not long, and in some stanzas it is which was not long. So this acts as the refrain of the poem. So all through the 10 stanzas we find the same refrain. Now, as I told you, it is set in a pastoral atmosphere, and in stanza 1 the poet Spenser himself, he is walking through the banks of the river, and he confesses to the reader that he is in a very lugubrious mood, a very sad and gloomy mood, because things were not working out according to his plan. Now, he was appointed as assistant to the secretary in Ireland, and he was not fond of his life in Ireland, and he kept trying to come back to England, but then unfortunately till the end of his life he never succeeded in coming back. And somewhere down the line he fell out of favor with Queen Elizabeth, and so he never could regain his position in England. So he is sad about that. So that is what is mentioned in the first stanza. So to ease my pain, he says, he decides to take a casual walk, a casual stroll down the banks of River Thames. And he notices, even in that mood, he just looks around and he sees that the flowers, the plants on either side of the river are in full bloom, and all sorts of dainty gems, that is how he calls the flowers, and they are all abloom, and they are all beautiful, fit enough to decorate the bridal bowers of young maidens. And then in stanza 2, he says that he sees a flock of nymphs by the riverside, lovely daughters of the flood, he says, and they've got beautiful green hair, and they've got little baskets, and all of them are busy plucking flowers. And he gives us a catalogue of flowers like violets, daisy, lily, primrose, vermeil roses, that is red roses. And he goes on in stanza 3 to describe a very beautiful a scene that he sees, that is, down the river come gliding two beautiful swans, two graceful swans, white swans. They come gliding, they don't even seem to be taking any effort at swimming, they just glide down the river. And now here these two swans actually stand for the two young ladies, Catherine and Elizabeth, who are going to get married. So the two swans glide down the river. And here the allusion. Now this poem abounds in a lot of mythological allusions from Greek mythology and Roman mythology. And so here you have the comparison is to the Jove and Leda. Jove or Zeus in Greek myth, and Leda, his lover. And so the two of them, that is how he talks about them. And here but here of course we should remember that both the swans that come swimming, they are both ladies, not lovers, as like Jove and Leda. And he now talks about the beauty of these two birds, and he says that the feathers, the feathers of the plumes of the birds are white, and they are even whiter than the snow on the top of Mount Pindus. Mount Pindus is a sacred mountain in Greek mythology, which was the abode of the Muses. So the snow atop the Pindus is white, but the plumes or the feathers of these two birds are even whiter, if that is possible. And the river god tells the waters to take care that they don't don't soil the plumes of these birds. And now the nymphs who we had seen earlier collecting flowers on either side of the bank, they stop their work for some time and they gaze at these wondrous birds. And so they wonder whether these two are the birds that draw the chariot of goddess Venus, because they feel that earthly beings cannot be so beautiful. And so the poet says that these two birds must have been conceived in summer's heat or the sweetest season. So here summer's heat It's actually a pun on Somerset. That is the father, the family, the father of these two young maidens. And now in stanza 5, the nymphs, who are wide-eyed with wonder, they throw their basketfuls of flour onto the two birds to show their admiration for the birds. And so now the waves are covered with flowers of all colors. The river now appears like the bedecked bridal chamber. And the river is now compared to the river of Peneus, which once flowed through Thessaly in Greece. It's a mythical river. And the two nymphs, they go down into the waters and they swim towards these two birds, and they crown them, they decorate them with garlands of the freshest flowers. And one of those nymphs sings a song to these birds, and she wishes the two, now we are going on to stanza 6, she wishes the two gentle birds, and because both of them are soon to enter blissful bower, because we are talking about Elizabeth and Catherine, and so she hopes that they would have great joy, and she bestows the blessings of fair Venus upon them. May the fair Venus, whose smile can remove all love's dislike and friendship's flaws, bestow her blessings on you. And then may you be happy, may you be peaceful, may you have children who can keep away your enemies and bring immense happiness to you. That is what they wish, these two birds. And the other nymphs too wish them the same. And Echo, the nymph Echo, she echoes their voices. And so the whole valley rings with wishes for these two birds. So the happy birds glide by, and as they glide by, now it is the river Lee, and so the river Lee cannot speak to them, but he shows his affection to them by ordering the waters to flow very slow, so as not to create any kind of impediment for the two birds. And now all the other water birds, water creatures living in the river, they flock around the two of these birds, but then in comparison to the two birds, all the other creatures just fade away. And here the comparison is made to Cynthia or the moon, how the moon outshines all the lesser stars. And all the creatures and the river and the nymphs, they attend to these two birds with great care. And finally in stanza 8, these two birds, the duo, they reach merry London. And now you can see Spenser's love for London, because he calls it merry London, and he says that London is his most kindly nurse, and it gave him life's first native source, because London is where he got his education from, London is where he began his career, so London is his nurse. And he also claims in this stanza, he also alludes to this claim, his familial connection with the ancient house of the Spensers of Althorpe. So he used to say that he is related, a distant relative of this particular family. So he reiterates the fact here. And then we pass through certain landmark buildings there. He mentions passing by those bricky towers. So here the reference is to the temple or a group of buildings on the bank of River Thames in London. Originally this was the abode of the Knight Templars, a military and a religious order, but later on they were taken over by the Society of Lawyers. And so this is one reference he makes there, and then again they move forward and they pass a stately place, and here the reference is to the Essex house. So Essex house once belonged to the Earl of Leicester, who was the patron of the poet, and now he talks about that great lord. So here the reference is to Robert Dudley, the Earl of Leicester, who had been his great patron, and Leicester was no more, and so Edmund Spenser misses him sorely, because he feels that if Leicester were alive, he would have helped him out of his difficult times. And so he talks about his friendless case. He expresses his sadness at the loss of a good friend like Robert Dudley, the Earl of Leicester. And now we reach stanza 9, where he talks about a noble peer, and there the reference is to Robert Devereux, the second Earl of Essex, and who was the stepson of the Earl of Leicester, that is Edmund Spenser's patron. And this particular person, that is Robert Devereux, the Earl of Essex, was very much in the good books of Queen Elizabeth, and there is also mention in the poem about how he led a kind of led an expedition to a military expedition to the place Cadiz in Spain, and how Essex captured it. So Edmund Spenser takes this opportunity to praise Essex on his achievement, and he also does not lose the opportunity to refer to Queen Elizabeth. He calls her Great Eliza. Okay, and now we reach the last stanza, stanza 10. So at last the two swans, the two beautiful swans, have reached their destination. They have reached very close to their home, and their father, the Earl of Worcester, Edward Somerset, he comes down the banks to meet and to welcome his two beautiful daughters. He's followed by a train of his people, and he is compared to Hesper or Venus because he's radiant and glorious. And in the group that comes forward to meet the two ladies, Edmund Spenser makes a specific mention of two young men who stand apart in their appearance and demeanor, and these are the prospective bridegrooms. Okay, these are the two, that is Henry Gifford and William Peter, the two men who are going to marry these two ladies. And he again takes this chance to speak about these two people, to praise them, to praise their appearance and their demeanor. And he says they are intelligent and handsome, like the twins of Jove, Castor and Pollux. So Castor and Pollux are actually the twin sons of Leda and Jove. So he compares these two young men to the twins of love. And the two men come forward and receive the beautiful maidens who are soon to be their wives. So this is how the poem reaches its completion. Now, when we talk about the themes in this poem, essentially it is a wedding song or a spousal verse. And there are a lot of mythological references to Jove and Leda and Cynthia and Venus, Castor and Pollux. So it abounds in mythical references. And the poet also takes this chance to reveal some political events, like, as I mentioned, the expedition to Cadiz. And again, he doesn't miss the chance to glorify Queen Elizabeth, calling her the Great Eliza. And in between, he also talks about some autobiographical details about his fall from grace and how he is very unhappy. And the reference, as I mentioned earlier, is to his exile-like condition in Ireland, and he laments the loss of a good friend, the Earl of Leicester. That all that he blends into the texture of the poem. So this is a poem. Now, I have often noticed that students rarely read the poem in the original. Generally the students just make do with the summary of the poem. But only if you read the real text, the original text, will you understand why these writers like Spenser and Shakespeare and Bacon, why these men are hailed as writers of all times, as classics, as masters. To know that, you should read the poem. And so that is again, as I usually say at the end of all my videos, please read the works. Maybe if you don't read all the 10 stanzas, at least you should read a few. And I'm sure that once you start reading the poem, you will naturally just glide like the two swans and reach the end of the poem, because the language is so beautiful. It's so melodious and so harmonious. And so this is one beautiful poem, Prothalamion, which is going to remain in the canons of English literature forever. So please read and enjoy the poem.